Welcome back. In this lesson, we are going to learn a very important concept in all programming languages and especially Python, which is functions. So we will discuss all the details needed for this course regarding functions. So what is a Python function? Functions take some inputs, perform some logic on these inputs, and finally return some outputs. Okay? Imagine that you want to calculate the sum of two variables. What if you want to repeat this process multiple times? It's better to have this process or this logic as a function in your code, right? Functions are considered the first level of abstraction. So you can have a function that calls another function. This is the second level of abstraction, and then a function that calls another function that called a third function. So this is the third level of abstraction. But for this course, we are only concerned about the first level of abstraction, which is functions. Okay? So again, functions basically take some inputs, perform some logic on these inputs, and return some outputs, if any. Now let's first discuss the most important built-in function in Python, which is the help function. As you know, Python has hundreds of built-in functions. We saw some of them, like the print function or the lens function, or the functions that we have in the list, or the functions that we have in the dictionary, and so on. Each function can have one or more inputs and outputs. And there is no need really to remember how to use any of them. You don't really need to take notes for how to use each of the functions that we are discussing or other functions that we have in Python. Because basically we can use the Python help function, which can help us decide how to use this function, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, and what is the logic of this function specifically, right? So for example, if we write help and then open the brackets and then write print, the output will be as follows. As you can see here, help on built-in function print in module built-ins. So this is the function that we have, which is print, and these are the different parameters or the different inputs for the print function. And as you can see here, the description for this function prints the value to a stream or to sys.standardout by default, and optional keyword arguments. These are the optional keyword arguments you can use for advanced printing, for example, and so on. So this is basically the documentation for the help function, okay, inside your code. So you don't really need to go and search in the documentation to know how you can use this specific function. And most of the famous libraries that we are going to discuss, like pandas and numpy, have their own help function that can help you do the same exact operation we are doing right now, okay? Now, how to define our own functions, right? The user-defined functions. First, you need to understand that Python uses the keyword called def to define the function. So def is short for define. Functions can have multiple inputs and or outputs. So we can have 2 inputs and no outputs. We can have no inputs and 3 outputs. We can have no inputs and no outputs. It's up to us. We are the ones who are implementing this function. It's a user-defined function. The following is an example of a function header. So this is the function header. As you can see here, we use the def keyword to define the function, and then this is the name of the function. After that, we have the circular brackets, and inside the circular brackets, these are the inputs for the function. So this is the multiply function we have been talking about, right? And then we have this colon to let Python know that we completed the function header, okay? After that, you need to understand that you can have optional inputs in your function header by assigning the value of the variable in the function header itself. So what does this mean exactly? This code right now we have multiply x, y, and z. Right now in the function header we have z equal 1. So this is the default value for z. This is an optional input. If you didn't specify z, then it will be by default 1. But if you specify z when you are calling the function, then it will have the new value. So this code will throw an error if you didn't provide x or y. But if you didn't provide z, it's going to work just fine. Now this is the function header. After that, we have the function body, and the function body contains the logic of the function. So we need to have it intended, right? In a code block, just like the loops, condition statements, while loops, for loops, if conditions. We saw this concept of code block or indentation before. So we need to do this also here. And as we said, we can return one or more inputs or no inputs at all using the return keyword. And this is an example. As you can see here, this is the function header. The first line we have the function header, and line 2 and 3 contain the logic, right? So we have result equal x times y, and then we return the result. And as you can see, we have this is the body of the function. How we know this? Because it's indented, right? So this is how you can write the function. First, you write the function header, and then you write the function body. But so far, we didn't call the function. So if we just write these 3 lines, we are not calling the function. So it's obsolete for now. We need to call it in order to make use of it, right? And we will see this when we go to the code. But for now, you need also to understand a very important idea, which is function naming. You cannot use spaces or special characters when you are naming your function. You cannot also use Python keywords or built-in functions names, which you can find here. If you go to this link, you will find it in the resources for this lesson. You will see all the preserved keywords and preserved built-in functions that you cannot name your function with. For example, you cannot name your function f, you cannot name your function for, right? And so on. And please try to use descriptive names for the inputs, outputs, and the function name itself. This is a good practice for you and for other people who are working with you, if any. Finally, we have a very important concept called the function documentation. We have something called docstrings, which is short for documentation strings, and it's crucial for documenting Python functions. It's optional. You can just leave your function as it is. You don't really need to do this documentation, but it's crucial for you and also for other people. It's very, very simple to do. You just use triple quotation strings in the line after the function header, just like this. So as you can see here, we have the same exact function, but inside this triple quotation, we have this documentation. So it's very similar to the comments, right? We saw comments before, and we saw that we can use hashtags to write comments, but this is used specifically for the function. So if you use it outside the function, it's fine, it's going to work, but it was originally developed by the Python creators to be used as documentation strings for the functions. And if you have a more complex function, you can add even more details to the docstrings as follows. So as you can see here, the same exact function, I want it to be more descriptive. So as you can see, we have description for the function, then we are describing what are the inputs for this function and what are the outputs for this function, and so on. And when we go to the machine learning part specifically and try to implement most of the machine learning algorithms, you will find that I am writing docstrings for nearly every single function, because this can help me and you understand much better what this function is doing. And if you want to know more details about the Python conventions for docstrings, you can go to this link here, and this link will lead you to the Python official documentation, and you'll see some conventions for writing docstrings. And you can also use this Stack Overflow thread. It contains some of the most wonderful explanations for the best practices when you are using docstrings. Now, enough talking about the theoretical part, let's go to the code and see how we can define our own first function. So here we are inside Google Colab. Let's first start by understanding the help function. So here I am calling the help function, and we use the len function, right? So if I run this code, you will see that we have help on built-in function len on module built-ins, and this is how we should use the function. We should give it an object. This object can be a list, it can be a tuple or whatever, right? And it returns the number of items in a container. So we give it a container. This container can be a list, it can be a dictionary, it can be a tuple, it can be any container we discussed, and it will return how many items we have inside this container. And you can also use the help function alone. So if you just write help and call it, you will see welcome to Python 3.6 help utility, If this is your first time using Python, you should definitely check out the tutorial on the internet. You can go here, enter the name of any module, keyword, or topic to get help on writing Python programs and using Python modules. To quit this help utility and return to interpreter, just type quit. To get a list of all the available modules, keywords, symbols, or topics, type modules, keywords, symbols, or topics. Each module also comes with a one-line summary of what it does. To list the modules whose name or summary contain a given string such as spam, type modules spam. So what we are seeing right now is an interactive documentation. So if you don't know exactly what you are searching for, you can call this help function and try to start from the very beginning, start from the modules, then it will list all the modules for you, and then maybe you want to go deeper into one of the modules and then one of the sub-modules and then one of the functions and so on, right? For now, let's just type quit, but I just wanted to show you this because it's pretty cool, right? So here we close this interactive help function. Now let's go to defining functions, right? Here we are defining the function using the function header. As you can see here, we have the multiply function. First number, this is the first input, this is the second input, and as we can see here, the second input is in fact optional because we are assigning a default value in the function header itself, and then we have this colon to specify that we ended the function header. Now this is the function body, these two lines, and as we can see, we have this indentation here and this indentation here. So this is a code block. Now we are using the return keyword to specify that we are returning this specific variable. So we didn't call this function yet, we just defined it, right? Here we want to call the function, so we will call this function with 4 and 6, and then we will assign the output in a variable called res. So if we print this, you will see that we have 24 because 4 times 6 is 24. Now if we didn't specify the second parameter, as you will see, the result will be 12 because the second variable or the second input by default is 3. Now if we didn't specify either the first or the second variable, it will give you an error, right? Multiply missing one required positional argument. It didn't tell you two required positional arguments because the other argument or the other input for this function is in fact optional. You can specify it or not. So let's just leave it like this. Now for documenting your functions, we can just write here triple quotation marks. So let me just show you here. If you come here and just write something like this, you will see that we have triple quotation marks. So we can write anything here, just like a comment, but it was done specifically or developed specifically for documenting functions. Okay, so this is the original use case for it, and it's still used till this day. So as you can see here, multiply two numbers together and return the result, input, output, and then we close the doc strings. So here we have, this is the function body. So this function is only 2 lines still, but this is a documentation for this function. Okay, so if we call this function, it will be no different than this function. Okay, this is everything you need to understand about functions for this course. Of course, this is not all the details about functions. You can go deeper and deeper in functions themselves. You can see the second level of abstraction, but this is really not required for this course. As you will see, we are going to use functions a lot, but we are going to use the information we discussed in this lesson only. We don't really need any extra information. And if we do, then I'm going to explain it in due time. Okay, so in the next lesson, we will have an overview about object-oriented programming. It will be important to understand some of the concepts in the data science part and also some of the algorithms when we implement them for the machine learning part. So let's go.